How should you structure your literature review? What order should you put things in? And what should you do if you keep going in and trying to tidy it up, but ending up in even more of a mess than you started in? Well, you should do the 4 things that we're going to talk about in this video. Firstly, you need to check your title and make sure that that isn't what's causing you problems. Secondly, you should identify keywords and key phrases from your title and then use them to develop provisional headings. Thirdly, you need to brainstorm some questions underneath those provisional headings, which are going to tell you exactly what you need from the literature. And then lastly, and fourthly, be prepared for your structure to change. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Yardley, and I've been supporting social sciences dissertation students for the last 20 years. Now, the literature review is probably the chapter that I get the most questions about, and the structure of the literature review is pretty much at the top of the list of the literature review questions. So let's dive in and look at those 4 things that you can use to structure your literature review better. So the first thing you need to do is take a look at your title and check that your title is not going to cause you any problems. Now, what I mean by this is the title too broad? Is it too wide? Because if your title isn't focused enough, if it isn't specific enough, that is going to translate into issues when you come to start structuring your literature review, when you come to develop an outline structure, outline headings. You're going to be like, oh, I'm a bit lost. I literally don't know how to do this. When you have a title that's too broad, one of 2 things is going to happen. Firstly, you are going to be completely stuck and not know what headings to put in there because you're just completely overwhelmed by the whole thing. Or in another scenario, you're going to have too many headings because you're just trying to cover way too much ground and you started mapping your literature review out and oh my goodness, there's just so much to it. So in the social sciences, your title, your dissertation title, should include 3 elements. There should be a who, there should be a what, and there should be a where. So the who is people. So every social sciences dissertation title needs to have people in it, okay? This is social sciences after all. So a group of people who have got at least one thing in common. Secondly, the what, the dissertation needs to focus on an issue or an interest. So an issue that your people are having or an interest that they have. So that needs to be something like a problem, a challenge, something that people want, something that people desire. And thirdly, the where, the context. There needs to be a place or a space, virtual or real, in which your people are having that issue or experiencing that interest. So you need all of those 3 elements to be in your title. Now, I have just kind of whizzed through that at lightning speed, but the reason that I've done that is because I'm not focusing on that in this video. In this video, I'm focusing on your literature review structure. But if you want help with your title, check out this video, because in this video I go through all of those things, okay? How to develop a who, a where and a what, or a who, a what and a where, to get them in the right order. So if you think that your title is too broad, if you've only got like one of those elements and you're like, oh, I've got a what but I haven't got a who and I haven't got a where, definitely check out that video because it's going to be really helpful for you in developing your title. So once you have your title and it's specific and it's focused and it has all of those 3 things in it, what do you do with it? The next thing that you need to do is identify the keywords and the key phrases in that title. Now, for the most part, those are probably going to be the same as the who, the where and the what. So you just pick those words out of the title or those phrases out of the title. And this probably sounds like super abstract, so I think we need an example. So here is an example of a dissertation title that has all of those 3 elements in it, the who, the where and the what. So trans students' experiences of exclusion in part-time jobs. So when we're picking out the key words and the key phrases, here are what those things are going to be. Firstly, trans students, okay? So those are our people, it's our who, so that's the first element there. Experiences of exclusion, that is our what, okay? That is our issue. So that's a key phrase that we're going to use there. And in terms of our where, our context, here we're looking at the part of the title that says part-time jobs. Okay, so that is the context in which our people, trans students, are experiencing their issue. So exclusion. So that's our context, part-time jobs. So sometimes when you get to this stage, you might find that you want to tweak and change your elements a little bit. You might want to swap them around. You might want to put them in a different order. You might want to kind of rewrite your title or your topic. And that is absolutely fine. Do feel free to do that. But the main thing that you're trying to get to here is those keywords and those key phrases. What we're going to do with those keywords and those key phrases now is use them to develop a provisional structure for our literature review. Now, this is going to look really simple at this point in time, and you're going to be like, really? Is that the structure that we're working with? But you've got to remember, this is a start. This is the beginning of developing perhaps what will turn into a more sophisticated structure, but we need to start somewhere. Okay, the process of structuring your literature review is not going to be something that you can just do just like that. It's something that develops, it's something that evolves as you go through the literature review process, as you learn more about your topic. But we need to start with something. And this is what we're going to start with in this example. Now that we have our structure, our provisional outline structure, we're going to get into a little bit more detail and start developing some subheadings underneath these provisional headings that we've got. So how are we going to do that? We are going to take each of our provisional headings in turn and we're going to brainstorm some questions underneath them. So we're going to have a think about what we want the literature to tell us, about what we need to find out from the literature if we're focusing on this particular thing. This is going to help us come up with a really logical structure of subheadings underneath each of those headings. And this is the part of the literature review that most people get stuck on. So they don't know quite how to organise the content in their sections of their literature review. They've got all of this information, all of this critical analysis that they've done of the literature, and they want to present that, but they just don't know how to do it. They don't know where to begin. So asking questions can be a really helpful activity at this stage because it helps us identify a series of subheadings underneath the headings, a series of headings that naturally unfold, that naturally develop, that start off being quite simple but then become more complex. Let's take a look at our example dissertation title and see what we might come up with underneath the first heading. So we've got the first section of our literature review here with the provisional heading trans students, or you might have a more sophisticated heading like lived experiences of trans students or trans people in higher education. Now what we're looking at here is developing a series of sections for this particular part of the literature review in terms of subheadings. So what subheadings could we include? Well, we get to those subheadings by asking questions. So the first question that we might want to ask is, what does the academic literature say about trans people's experiences of life in general? So what areas of the literature are concerned with exploring their experiences? So here you might come across stuff like queer theory, for example. Next up, we might look at the experiences of students in general. What is being a student about? And is it helpful to think about students as one homogeneous lump or mass of people who are all the same? And actually, queer theory, something that you would definitely discover around the literature relating to that first question, queer theory would be very critical of categorising people in this way. So here we've got quite a nice link that we can make there. What does the literature say about diversity within the student population? So you could have a section that looks at these issues. The next thing that we can do is bring these two previous headings or previous questions together. We can look at the experiences of trans people who are students. Is there any specific literature about their experiences? What does that literature say about their strengths and needs, about challenges and opportunities? Then we might want to take a particular element of student life. So for example, the financial side of student life, the need for students to work in most cases. So there will be literature about that you can draw on in this section. And you might want to highlight whether you think trans students might have distinct experiences in terms of finances, especially if there's no specific literature about this. So think about relationships with families, for example. Are they more or less likely to be financially supported by parents? which you can then link back to what you found out about trans people's experiences of life in general, which you looked at in an earlier question. That then nicely leads you on to the next heading, where you can focus on the literature about part-time work. So can you see how I've come up with those questions just through thinking about some of the issues that trans students might experience and breaking that down, looking at specific things to start off with and then expanding them out to look at broader things. Another thing that you'll notice that I was doing that was linking back and forth between the different subheadings, the different subsections that I'd come up with. Now, this is a really valuable thing to do in your literature review because it demonstrates that you can synthesize, that you can look across things, that you can bring things together around your topic, around your title to make better sense of them. You can take what you've learned from the literature underneath one subheading and link it to another subheading and think about the implications of that literature for this subheading. Like the link that I made between queer theory, being critical of categorizing people, of lumping them together, and then what I said in the next subheading about students, about treating students as one kind of whole mass of people who are all the same. So you are incrementally building up your knowledge as you structure your literature review. You are layering it. You are taking what you've learned in one section and then you're building on that. You're thinking about the implications. You're looking more broadly across the literature. What you need to do now is do this for each of your headings. And I'd advise you to just use a pen and a piece of paper or just a Word document to do it. Try not to go and delve into the literature whilst you're doing it, because that's going to make it a really long-winded process. It's going to make it really complicated. And sometimes simple is best in the beginning. Start off simple and then develop it, then make it more complex. And you're much better off doing it this way because you're going to be able to do a very quick overview, a very quick brainstorm of some questions just off the top of your head than you are if you're trying to do like loads of looking around online and on Google Scholar and everywhere else. So just trust in the ability of your own brain to make some of these connections in the first place. Okay, lastly, you need to be open to the possibility of your structure changing as you go through your literature review. So I've alluded to this already, but it's definitely worth making the point again. That's the structure that we're starting off with now, these three headings. That is your provisional outline structure. Some elements of that might stay there, and you might end up taking one, two, or even all three of these headings into the actual final version of your literature review. But it's more likely that they are going to swap and change a little bit. You might end up building two headings together because it makes sense to talk about them simultaneously. You might end up expanding one of them out because there are two or three distinct things that are sitting underneath that heading that need to actually be headings in and of themselves. As you learn more about the literature, as you read more of the literature, as you make more connections between different parts of the literature, your structure needs to keep up with that. So your literature review is something that you are going to be in and out of throughout the process of doing your dissertation. You're going to be constantly making tweaks and changes to it. And another piece of advice I would give you is not to write it out in full, not to write it out in kind of full perfect sentences and not spend ages like obsessing over that at this stage at the beginning. Because if the structure is going to change anyway, if you're going to start taking things out, putting things in, moving stuff there, can't even get my words out today. If you're going to start taking things out, putting things in, moving things around, you are going to have to dismantle all of that perfect writing. So the best thing to do is to write in bullet point form, in note form, because that way it makes your literature review much easier to work with, much easier to kind of swap and change around. So there you have it, 4 things that you can do to start structuring your literature review today. Firstly, make sure your title isn't causing you any problems. Secondly, identify the keywords and the key phrases from that title that you can then use to structure your sections. Thirdly, develop some questions underneath each of those provisional headings that you want the literature to answer. And fourthly, be open to the possibility, well, the inevitability of your literature review structure changing. So I hope you found that helpful, and I will be back in a few days with another video with more study tips.